This young man has gone from relative unknown to superstardom around the world.
What if I told you that Conor McGregor's greatest weapon wasn't his left hand? It was the invisible zone he created that made that left hand unstoppable. In this breakdown, we'll dissect the distance control system that made Conor McGregor one of the most dangerous strikers in MMA history. We'll analyze the mechanics behind his range manipulation, reveal why opponents constantly misjudge their positioning, and show you exactly what made this approach so devastatingly effective. By the end, you'll understand why this masterpiece of spatial awareness has never been successfully replicated. To understand why McGregor's distance game became so unique, we need to go back to his roots in Straight Blast Gym Ireland under John Kavanagh. While most MMA fighters were still brawling in phone booths, Kavanagh was obsessed with one concept: controlling the space where fights actually happen. He studied fencing, analyzed boxing's golden era, and became fixated on a simple truth: the fighter who controls distance controls everything. McGregor didn't just learn this philosophy, he became its perfect expression. His karate background gave him the long, bladed stance. His boxing training gave him timing. But it was his obsessive study of movement and range that created something the sport had never seen: a fighter who could make you feel safe right before he destroyed you. But what makes this distance system so impossible to replicate? Let's start with the foundation: his stance. McGregor fought from an extremely wide side-on karate stance with his lead foot pointed directly at his opponent and his rear foot nearly perpendicular. His weight distribution was roughly 60-40, favoring the rear leg, which created a spring-loaded base. His hands were held relatively low compared to traditional boxing, with his lead hand extended almost like a fencer's weapon. This wasn't just stylistic. Every element served the distance equation. The wide stance created maximum reach extension while maintaining balance. The side-on profile minimized his target area, making him harder to hit while maximizing his offensive reach. Most fighters compromise reach for power generation, but McGregor's stance allowed him to maintain both. His rear hand could still generate knockout power despite the wide base because of how he rotated his hips and shoulders. McGregor's footwork was calculated, precise, and predatory. Unlike pressure fighters who march forward or counter-strikers who move backwards, McGregor operated in what he called the pocket, just outside the pocket. He would glide forward using small, measured steps, never lunging, never rushing. His lead foot would tap the canvas, feeling for the exact distance where his left hand could land, but his opponents couldn't. This constant probing created a psychological trap. Opponents felt safe because he wasn't applying pressure, but the moment they committed to any offensive action, they discovered they were already in his range. His lateral movement was equally deceptive. He'd circle away from power hands using smooth, flowing steps that looked relaxed but kept him at the perfect angle to counter. The brilliance was in the timing. He moved when opponents were thinking about moving, not after they'd already committed. This proactive footwork meant he was always one step ahead in the distance game. McGregor's defense wasn't built on blocking. It was built on spatial awareness. His primary defensive tool was simply not being there. He'd pull his head back just enough to make punches miss by millimeters, staying close enough to counter but far enough to stay safe. His eyes never left his opponent's chest and shoulders, reading their weight shifts before punches were even thrown. When opponents threw combinations, he'd lean back slightly at the waist, letting their punches fall short while maintaining his own attacking range. His lead hand acted as both rangefinder and defensive tool. It would frame his opponent's face, controlling distance while also obstructing their vision. What separated him from other distance fighters was his comfort with near misses. Most fighters panic when punches come close. McGregor thrived there. He understood that a punch missing by an inch was the same as missing by a foot, except now his opponent was out of position and he was perfectly positioned to counter. But his defensive genius was only setting the trap. The real devastation came when he attacked. McGregor's attacking system was built around making opponents believe they were safe until the exact moment they weren't. His primary weapon, the left straight, wasn't just powerful, it was precisely calibrated to his distance control. He'd spend entire rounds measuring with his lead hand, pawing at his opponent's face, tapping their gloves, creating a rhythm. Then, the moment they settled into that rhythm, he'd explode forward with his left hand, covering an extra 6 inches they didn't know existed. The secret was in his setup. He'd throw probing jabs that intentionally fell short, programming his opponent to believe they were out of range. Then he'd shift his weight, step his lead foot forward just 2 inches, and suddenly that same punch would land flush. His favorite combination was devastatingly simple: leg hand touch, rear uppercut to draw the guard up, then left straight over the top. But the real mastery was in how he used feints and distance manipulation together. He'd lean forward slightly without stepping, making opponents react to a threat that wasn't coming, then explode into the space they'd just vacated. Every strike was thrown from the perfect distance, close enough to land with maximum impact, far enough that counters couldn't reach him. What really separated McGregor's distance game was his use of the step-in left uppercut from long range, something you simply don't see in MMA. Traditional wisdom says uppercuts are inside weapons, but McGregor would throw them from distances where opponents expected straight punches. He'd read his opponent leaning back to avoid his straight left, then step forward and rip an uppercut up the middle, catching them in their defensive movement. Another unorthodox element was his rear teep kick, thrown from his wide stance. While most fighters use teeps to create distance, McGregor used his to measure and control it. He'd flick the teep at his opponent's lead leg or midsection, not to damage but to gauge their reaction time and keep them hesitant. The kick also served as a rangefinder for his left hand. If the teep landed, he knew his punch would too. What caught opponents completely off guard was his spinning back kick to the body, thrown from what appeared to be safe distance. The technique worked because of his distance manipulation. Opponents thought they were out of range, dropped their guard slightly, and suddenly a heel was driving into the ribs. McGregor's understanding of range made him nearly impossible to counter. He operated on a simple principle. He wanted to exist in a zone where only he could hit his opponent, but his opponent couldn't hit him back. This meant constant micro-adjustments. If an opponent stepped forward, he'd glide back just enough to maintain his zone. If they retreated, he'd flow forward, never letting them reset to a comfortable distance. His fight IQ showed in how he manipulated opponent reactions. Against pressure fighters, he'd bait them forward with subtle retreats, then explode with counters the moment they overcommitted. Against counter-strikers, he'd use feints and touches to draw reactions, then punish them for flinching. He understood that distance isn't static. It's a living, breathing thing that changes with every movement. Most fighters think in terms of in range or out of range. McGregor thought in inches, constantly adjusting to maintain his perfect striking distance while keeping opponents in their uncomfortable zone. The reason you rarely see this level of distance control in MMA is because the sport's multi-dimensional nature makes it nearly impossible to maintain. In boxing, you only worry about punches. In MMA, wrestling and kicks constantly disrupt distance management. McGregor succeeded because he had elite takedown defense and used his distance control to neutralize wrestling threats. Opponents couldn't shoot from where he kept them. The kicks that would normally disrupt his stance were countered by his constant movement and his own kicking game. Most MMA fighters can't commit to pure distance striking because they're too worried about being taken down. McGregor's defensive wrestling was good enough that he could fight his fight without compromise. This approach didn't just win fights, it changed how we think about striking in MMA. McGregor proved that precision and distance could overcome size, reach disadvantages, and even stylistic nightmares. He showed that you don't need to be the fastest or the strongest if you control where the fight happens. His influence is everywhere now. Every fighter trying to fight long, every coach emphasizing range control, every analyst talking about fighting at your distance. But here's the truth. They're copying the concept without understanding the obsession required to execute it. McGregor spent thousands of hours feeling distance, measuring it, owning it. That level of mastery can't be replicated with a training camp or a technique adjustment. And this is why Conor McGregor's distance system remains unreplicated. Because true mastery isn't in knowing the trick, it's in feeling the inches. Before you go, drop a like and comment what fighter or technique you want us to break down next. And of course, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future videos.